it's because the United States stood for freedom, did not recognize occupation, and so many other things that come from Washington allowed us to regain our freedom. That is what shaped me as a politician, as a diplomat. So seeing that change, really hurts.
Welcome to the Diplomacy Podcast, where we explore how diplomacy shapes our world and our lives. Before I introduce my speaker today, let me thank all of you for watching on YouTube, on Substack, listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And a special thanks to those of you on YouTube who contributed to a mini explosion of a podcast in the last 2 weeks. So again, thank you. To talk about the state of transatlantic relations today, I'm joined by Gabrielius Landsbergis, who was the Lithuanian foreign minister from 2020 to 2024. He is in Greece, but he'll soon be back in Vilnius. So welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let me begin with your snapshot of the current state of the relationship between the European Union and the United States. How do you assess that relationship at the moment, as of today, because things can change quite rapidly?
Well, I think that the things are definitely changing. We still don't know into what. Clearly, the relationship that has been formed after the Second World War, or especially especially for us on the eastern flank who joined the Western Alliance after the end of Cold War, is in flux. That means that all the pieces are in move, and we don't know where they are going to settle. It is clear that it has been started by the current U.S. administration. It has been declared even previously, before President took office. So there shouldn't be a lot of shock that this is happening, kind of because we've been moving into this situation. But since the dependencies have been formed for long years and long decades, even from European side, that means that a lot of people, a lot of politicians and decision makers are in, well, I would even call it in a state of shock, where they really still have not figured out how to approach this new and changing dynamics with the main transatlantic partner. And even more so, the problem is that we have, and as you mentioned, that enormous geopolitical change on our side of the Atlantic, meaning that there is the war that we haven't seen since basically the end of Second World War, a scale of such happening and threatening even to expand beyond Ukraine, probably even into NATO, into European Union, or at least threaten the countries within there. And that puts, additional questions into how or what sort of transatlantic relationship would we want? What would it mean if it changes? What it means if it breaks? Especially in the eye of the changes that we're seeing, that are coming from the East.
If you were in office currently and advising the Prime Minister and the President of your country, and of course your colleagues in Brussels, how do you think EU diplomacy in particular may have to adjust as a response to what is happening in Washington?
Well, I would... that's a very good question, actually, because I was advising these sort of things even before I left the office, because it was, at least for me, it was rather evident that it's a very big chance that Donald Trump will return to the office. It's a very big chance that if he returns, he will implement the policies that he is declaring as his policies before the election. And that will have an enormous impact on the European security, Ukrainian security, and also European security. So I think that certain things are done well right now, meaning that Europe is in a way buying time, and this is again what I would advise to do, really to use all the instruments that are available in order to continue engaging President Trump in European security. So that is extremely important. But on the other hand, we have to prepare that we, even with buying time and with nice visits to Washington and all the diplomatic endeavors that we're doing, we still don't control. We don't control the room. We have very little and very limited leverage on the Americans right now. We're not used to using any leverage. That means that the game could be over any day.
It seemed to me after Trump returned to the White House and made a series of quick decisions that the Europeans were caught by surprise, even though he had spelled out many of those policies and intentions during the campaign. And it also seemed to me that it took a very long time for the Commission, for other decision-making bodies on the continent to sort of get their act together and decide how to begin to respond. Was that a correct impression?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct impression. I think that we're still in the state of denial about the deeper change that is taking place in the United States. Many people are quick to write it off to okay, so there was Trump 1, then it changed, so we got Biden, and that was so much better, and now it's Trump 2, and so maybe after it's over, we'll get something again that is pro-European and transatlantic and stuff like that. I believe that the change is more fundamental, where it's not about the administration anymore. It's not about a single person. It's about the mandate. It's about the general mood in the country, where people have lost the understanding why the transatlantic relationship matters. And it might be because of a cyclical nature of your American politics, where the isolationism returns once in a while, like it did before the First World War or Second World War. Maybe now it's again back in the in the general. Maybe it's because the Europeans took so many things for granted. We never reiterated to the American public why it's a two-way street. So I mean, there are multiple factors that we kind of do not count in. When I try to look back and then pinpoint the time where the change probably started happening was, most likely it's rather simple. It's Obama's pivot to Asia. That was the first time when the president of the United States, in modern times, would develop a strategy that is not transatlantic, that is not European based, that it's even a Middle Eastern strategy is very much European, because it's so much closer geographically to European continent. While Obama was really saying that, look, our interest is Indo-Pacific. This is where our threats and opportunities are coming from, and everything from there basically led to the point where we are currently now, where the United States are not interested in Russia, not interested in Ukraine, do not care about European defense as much as any previous administration did. And probably, as I said, that comes not just from single person understanding, but from the way that the country thinks.
One of the conclusions of what's been happening in the past few months, especially with the tariffs policy, of course, has been that we've all realized just how much most of the rest of the world has been dependent on the United States for all those decades, right? Not just economically, but in various other ways. So with that in mind, how do you assess the decision and also the performance of the European Commission president in her meeting with Trump in Britain a few weeks ago, when they agreed on this trade policy and the tariffs?
Well, it's interesting because on one hand, it seemed like Europe is giving in. is, it's so much different than, for example, the whole showdown that is still ongoing with China, right? Where the tariffs are imposed, then they are postponed because they're rare metals are kind of, the ban on rare metals export from China is introduced. The kind of, so it's a power play between two global powers. So the whole attitude was very, very much different with Europe, and it got many thinking, like, so why is that? Why would we accept a unilateral tariff of 15%? Like, we didn't even bargain. You wouldn't argue. You just kind of accepted, and that was it. So one explanation is that, as you say, that there was an enormous leverage, and not just in the field of trade. Because if it was only trade, probably it would have been easier, right? So basically, then you talk the same language. Now there is, just to name one thing, there is what is called the forced posture review, which is going to be announced next month, probably a couple of weeks, meaning how many U.S. troops will be remaining in Europe, and that alone is could be a decision of strategic proportions for Europe. I'm not even saying that, that what would mean if troops are removed from my country, from Lithuania, from Poland, from Germany, in the wake of Russian invasion in Ukraine, which is, still far from being stopped. So that alone, and knowing that Trump can use all the leverage that he has, in order to achieve what he would believe a good trade deal, that puts us in a very, very difficult position. Leaves us actually open, but probably European Commission leaders feel that there is very little that they can do about it. That if we start using our trade leverages on the Americans, very soon we'll find ourselves with information that, okay, fine, the troops are being removed. Maybe even Ukraine will no longer get intelligence. You're no longer being allowed to purchase military equipment or something like that. That's enormous leverages that we basically cannot deal with at the moment. The second explanation could be that when you look at it, at least from today's perspective, most of the tariffs are basically it's a purchase tax that is mostly paid by the American consumer, and a part of it is being put on the companies in Europe, but most of the companies, especially if the product is is competitive enough, is being put on the consumer. And I've read the reports, about the 60% of the tariffs are being paid by the American consumers. So if that could have also been part of the European calculation. So why do we fight this battle if at the end of the day, President Trump will just tax his people? He will tax American people. If they want to do it, well, fine. We can as well do it. The biggest problem with it, so apart from the image problem, which probably is easier for Europe to swallow than, for example, for Chinese leaders, for them, to look weaker in the debate with Americans is almost impossible, right? So they need to maintain this reciprocity. For Europeans, it's not ideal, but it's definitely not as bad, So if Chairman Xi would accept the tariffs, unilateral tariffs, so for him, he cannot look weak in the eye of his, party and people. For von der Leyen, well, basically she can allow herself to be in that position. But the bigger problem is that it will have an effect on some of the vulnerable European industry parts, such as automotive, because it's a tough competition globally for especially for Germany, and being forced to pay or to become 15% more expensive in the market, like US, it will hurt. So how that is going to be alleviated, I'm not sure yet. That might, have long-term repercussions.
Let me ask a big question. Given that many capitals around the world are rethinking their relationship with the United States, more specifically their dependence on the United States, this will, of course, have an impact on American power going forward, right? There is and there will be, I believe, a significant realignment, not only of interests, but also of diplomacy, of global diplomacy. How do you see that realignment? Is it sustainable for so much of the world, not just in Europe, to rely on the United States for so much economically, politically, in terms of security as well?
Well, I think that it will change, and it's already changing. I think that undoubtedly the U.S. leverage on Europe, on so many other countries, will diminish. Countries will rethink their dependencies, and many things are already happening, and they show signs of new formations, that come either from financial economic need, or just the worry that basically we're not sure where the things are headed. Then talking about the alliances, we're seeing the realignment as well in new formations being, and not formations, but basically new ties, new bridges being formed. Just take, for example, Canada, right? The country that was one of the, quite hard hit by the tariffs and by the diplomatic assault by the new administration in the United States. Their approach to Europe was very proactive. We're seeing, ministers traveling, reaching out, there's a huge diplomatic effort by the Canadian government into, at least in Europe, they're interested in developing, contracts with the European defense industry, building on that, being accepted into procurement contracts, where Canadian countries could offer, products and equipment for European countries, which are, going to procure more. So that's one example. The second thing would be probably United Kingdom, especially after Brexit. It felt like UK has drifted very far from European Union. You would rarely find a table where we would sit together and talk the same topics that would interest both sides in the same direction. And now it's happening. But UK is very much back on the European agenda. And I believe that if US would disengage even further, look inwards even more, we would see that going forward. We would see probably Europe stretching out its arms in the Indo-Pacific more. There are more talks with Japan. Japan just announced that they might be interested in looking into the security guarantees to Ukraine, which is an enormous thing, I would assume. We don't know the details of it clearly now, not yet, but that is a thing. So you would see a new network, a global network being formed, basically around or without the United States.
And how do you feel generally about the Union and what it has produced? Do you think, on balance, that the positives of having the EU outweigh any negatives that come out of the huge bureaucracy in Brussels and other things that some of the population may perceive as clumsy, negative?
Well, look, I mean, it's an easy question for me. I'm coming probably from one of the most pro-European countries in Europe, where 90% of people support European Union. So we've been probably the outstanding example of what Europe can achieve, even with this bureaucracy and clumsiness and whatnot. Basically, it helped us transform from a country that was occupied for 50 years and struggling with its transformation from one sort of economy into, to the market economy. And it was definitely not easy. And European Union really helped us through that. And now we're, we're a prospering Western country, with kind of, which is a wonderful example to those who are wishing to join EU. So many others, Moldova and Georgia, and same Ukraine, they point at us and say, "Look, we would like to be there. There's something right was done in those countries that helped them to be where they are. We would like some of that." So there are excellent examples of what EU can do, and we would like to see more of that.
Okay, let's move to Ukraine. So we've had the meeting in Alaska. We have had the meeting, the second meeting in the Oval Office with the Ukrainian president and the plethora of other European leaders, including heads of state and government. What are your biggest fears about any attempt to negotiate with Russia, as well as what's happening on the battlefield?
Well, the biggest worry remains and probably will be until it's completely resolved, is that we are on the verge of what is called the Yalta Agreement, basically where the part of Eastern and Central Europe are divided against the wishes of the people who live there. Just because they're, like people like to call it, that reality calls for it. Because there are, just thousands of Russian, hundreds of thousands of Russian troops, and, nobody's willing to evict them. And this is what is called a reality. That sort of a deal, and why it's seen as a worst case scenario, is that basically that would encourage Putin. That would rewrite the rules that European continent has been governed until now, with the inviolability of borders. So that's why, that's why we're so much worried. And I think that Putin is already getting these vibes, let's say, that he's going the right way. That he might get what he actually wants, not just militarily, but diplomatically, politically. That he will be allowed, maybe even now, maybe he's already allowed a free hand in Ukraine. He's not, very few people still talk about justice, about reparations, about, even the return of the stolen children is quite rarely mentioned, by the Americans. So it's a new reality that fits Putin's agenda. And that is what is so much worrying for quite a lot of Europeans. Now, when it comes to Ukraine itself, I mean that, the worst case scenario is that Ukrainians are unable to hold the front. Many people are saying, look, Russians have been able, just to take 1% of territory in a year, and they are moving extremely slow. And that is true. Russians are not successful, in fast moving warfare, but they have enormous power behind them. 140 million people. The resources are really, really very, their pockets are very deep. That means that they can continue this. And I'm not sure how long can Ukrainians continue. And if they, maybe one day they will say, okay, fine, it's just too much for us. And, nobody is sure that they will never say that. We would never know. And if that were to happen, then it's a horrible scenario. And that means that Ukrainians have been and are still defending not just their country, but if we say that it's horrible to us if they lose, that means that they're defending us as well. And we haven't accepted that as a fact of life. That is my personal, worry.
So you were the foreign ministry at the beginning of your career, and then you went into politics and you came back as foreign minister at 38. Was that planned?
So for me, the couple of points happened. So one was the difficulty of switching between the governments that the diplomats have to be accustomed with. to kind of to follow one policy, then after election follow a different policy, and then kind of imagine that it's still yours, that you fully embrace it. That I couldn't handle. That I couldn't handle well. I mean, I could have handled, but I decided not to. It was, too much of a challenge. So I decided that it's better than to try and formulate my own policy in politics rather than to agree to the things that I'm unable to. Because I was working with center-right government in 2008 and 12. I really liked what they were doing, and then there was complete shift. So center-left government was elected, and I just couldn't agree, and I couldn't work with them. So I decided I'd better quit, see what's out there, and then I joined politics, and so that happened. And then later on, so I was elected a party chairman. I ran the party. I ran it, I was a member of opposition, and again ran the party list, and finally won the election. And I decided, and I understood properly that the foreign policy and the events that are happening around my country that influence my country, or my country can influence those events. This is what my heart is. That I've, that was a reason I joined diplomacy, at the beginning of my career, and that stayed with me. And it's still there. You cannot cure it.
Well, I always say that the second most difficult part of diplomacy is that you have to promote, defend, and advance the policies of whoever is in power, even if you disagree with them. Right? What is the first most difficult thing about diplomacy? I will reveal in somewhere else and on the podcast at some point. And finally, I know you have strong feelings about the United States personally, and you know a lot about the country and have a lot of experience. How are you perceiving currently what is happening in the United States? What the United States is doing on the world stage, and are you reassessing your impression of the country?
My family, was at the core of independence of my country, right? So my grandfather was one of the first leader of the country, and we've always spoke about that our independence is connected to the United States foreign policy. It's because the United States stood for freedom, did not recognize occupation, and so many other things that come from Washington allowed us to regain our freedom. That is what shaped me as a politician, as a diplomat. So seeing that change, really hurts. But with time, basically you accept most of the things as a force of nature. So, if you see tornado, it's it doesn't, you're not angry at it. It's just there. It's just doing what they do. In some cases, they wreck things. So you just have to plan your life around it.
And on that happy note, thank you for joining me. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Remember, diplomacy is the world's best hope. See you next time.